Hello, and welcome to another episode of Game, Develop, Repeat, the podcast where we talk about a game that I enjoy, what makes it special, and what we as game developers can learn from it. I'm your host, Chris, a music educator turned indie game developer, and today's episode is all about Celeste, finally. In this episode, we discuss empathetic gameplay, how specific elements in a game can affect player emotions, and whether or not game mechanics themselves can directly impact your emotions. Let's get to it. It is finally time to talk about Celeste. I've been holding off for way too long in terms of talking about this game. I've mentioned it a few times. I've talked about how I want to make an episode on it, but I hadn't been able to figure out the angle of approach. I hadn't been able to figure out what exactly in the game I wanted to talk about, other than, oh man, I really enjoy this game. And I think now I know how to discuss it. And the angle that we're going to take here is we're going to talk about how Celeste engages your empathy and makes you feel for the characters, not just through story. And this is one of the things that I think is very unique about this game. It doesn't engage you purely through story. It engages you through the mechanics of the game. So it's got the story, it's got the visuals, it's got the whole overarching theme of the game is like climbing this mountain. It's this whole metaphor for difficulty and journeys and like getting through a challenge, all of this good stuff. At the same time, it does have the story and it does have the characters, right? But I don't want to overlook the impact of the gameplay mechanics on this emotional journey that it takes you through. Quick rundown for anybody who has not played Celeste. First off, highly recommend that you play it. It is a 2D platformer. Like I mentioned, it's sort of about climbing a mountain. It's very much a game that gets speedrun, but I would not say it is specifically a speedrunning game. What I mean to say is it is definitely designed with the speedrunning community in mind to some extent. I mean, if you play it even just a little bit, you go, oh, okay, they're like aware of the fact that the speedrunning community is going to love this game. And so one of the challenges you can do is like ripping through levels really quickly and picking up stuff as much as you can. But for me, the challenge of the game is just beating it. It is not the easiest game, but it doesn't feel all that difficult because it's very, I say that, it's difficult, but it's very approachable because of how much it gets you invested very early on. And there's not really a point in the game where I felt like, man, screw this is pointless, I don't want to deal with this, why am I even doing this? Throughout the whole game, every challenge I ran into, I was like, I'm invested in this, I want to get through this because I need to, because this is the journey we're going on, this is what we're doing, is we're getting past this. And there weren't any challenges that just felt like unbreakable brick walls. The hardest challenges I ran into were like there were specific bonus pickups, strawberries. There are specific ones that I had trouble getting and went, okay, well, maybe I'll come back to that later if I want to, but I'm not going to bother right now, right? It's well designed in that respect. But there's not a ton to say to sell you on the gameplay mechanics themselves, other than they're extremely well executed. It is a platformer with very, very smooth mechanics. Nothing feels overly punishing, even though the game is very difficult. There's not a moment where I'm playing where I go, oh, well, that was nonsense, right? Which I definitely get with platformers because I'm not a platformer guy. I tend to play platformers and get annoyed because I fall into the lava constantly. I am that player. I cannot land a jump for the life of me. And yet I beat this game. It is it is that compelling and interesting and well made. It's got the thing where every time you die you can just like reset very, very quickly, so you don't run into that thing where you have to watch a whole load menu and whatever else, right? So all of that good stuff. Now let's talk about the thing I actually want to talk about, which is the empathetic gameplay. I think the easy thing to talk about is the easy jumping off point is that the game is difficult, and it frames that difficulty from the perspective of this is something that this character has to get through for their own sake. It is this intense mental health journey that the main character has to get through, and they are going through some stuff in their life, and they have to kind of break through that by climbing this mountain, right? Kind of a wild thing. And throughout this journey that they're going on, they run into different interesting characters, and there are kind of resting points in the journey which serve as a resting point for the character, and they also serve as a resting point for you. This is a great example of how it executes this concept. You're going through all these difficult levels, and you're having all these challenges, and you break through kind of a wall, and you, like, in terms of gameplay, you get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm starting to get a little comfortable, but that was really challenging, whatever. And they've timed it really well so that there's like, oh, here's a little campfire with this guy who's also climbing the mountain. So you're not the only person on this journey. You're not the only person climbing this mountain. This other person has their own reasons, right? It's this really beautiful metaphor for like struggling through the difficult things in life. And the fact that it feels completely isolated, but you've got other people alongside you on this journey. You just don't see them all the time because you can't really be climbing it together all the time, right? Like everybody's kind of got to go their own path and figure it out. So it pulls that together beautifully. It pulls that concept together really well. And when you're getting a little tired of just platforming and repeating these levels 10, 20, 30 times in a row to get through this and falling on spikes over and over and over, and then you get through and you get to this little campfire and you have a nice little chat, it is a huge relief for you as a player to see your character get a moment to like process some stuff. And that's when the story advances for me, is when you're talking to these other side characters. And I always made sure to talk to them as much as I could, get all the dialogue, you know. I guess you could just run right past them in a lot of instances, but I guess later in the story, not so much. But it is compelling, to say the least. And I'm not going to get into story details. I don't want to say too much about any specific characters or what exactly the main character is doing and all this stuff. But just in case you haven't played it, I definitely recommend playing it. I'm going to keep focusing on gameplay stuff. But the gameplay itself frequently reflects the emotional state of the main character. The environments that you're going through, the things that happen during this climb, it's all constructed to reflect the emotional journey that the character is going through. I mean, there is, without spoiling anything, you can look at this idea of a character climbing a mountain, and you can imagine how many different things you could build into that journey to make it feel like it's got a good number of like emotional arcs, right? Different challenges that you run into, particularly steep sections, that sort of thing. And I'll leave that there. The characters that you bond with are relatable in different ways. I think one of the interesting things in this game is that every character's kind of emotional story arc is going to land for different people in different ways. It's clear that there is a lot of kind of mental health discussion in this game. It's kind of getting you to engage with the idea of like, oh, look, everybody is going through their own struggles and they're all dealing with it in their own particular way, and everybody's got a different thing that they're dealing with for different reasons. And it's inviting you to engage with those struggles, and it's inviting you to understand the the perspectives of each one of these characters. it's inviting you to say, why is that character acting that way? Why are they going through this thing? Why are they doing this? It's not a game about heroes and villains. It's a game about relating to other people. Um, and the commitment to that, the commitment this game has to uh, understanding what everybody is going through is really nice. It's so uplifting and wholesome, and I have a deep appreciation for that fact. Um, and this is really the thing that I want to learn from this game is how is it bringing me into a specific state of mind? What exactly is this game doing? I know the music is having a big impact. The music is crazy good. And then the artwork, the visual style, the gameplay itself, the writing, the sound design, all of these factors are coming together to pull me into a very specific state of mind. And it's so well coordinated and so beautifully mapped out. I don't know how many people were working on this project. This is one of those things that I should look into, but I didn't because this is a fairly improvisational podcast, just by the nature of how much time I have for recording it. But it impresses me that more than one person could get together and have a cohesive vision for this game. And I do know that it was more than one person because I know that they had Power Up Audio on the sound design stuff. By the way, anybody who's into sound design, tiny little side note, check out Power Up Audio. Check out their Real Talk show on Twitch. You will learn a ton about sound design. They go through people's sound design portfolios and review them, and it is one of the most valuable resources I have ever seen. It's such a great resource for anybody trying to learn sound design, even if you're trying to learn a little bit about it. For your own sake, it will train your ear because you will be watching, and the host will. Oh no, I'm gonna pronounce his name wrong. It's Kevin Regami. Yeah, I think I got it. I really should have that right because I listened to so much of the show. But the host has incredible ears, and he will notice something, and you'll be like, "Wait, I didn't hear that," and you're like, "Oh, there are things that I'm just not hearing that other people are hearing," and you'll start to tune into it. That tangent done, but those are the guys who worked on the audio for this game. And then Lena Raine was the composer, and my God, does she compose some beautiful music. This is a game worth experiencing. There's actually not that much more I can say about the gameplay, but the thing, without like getting into things that I consider spoilers that most people would not consider spoilers, but I'm very picky about what I consider a spoiler. The most important thing in this to me is the empathetic gameplay, and I do think there are other games that do that sort of thing. I think Spiritfarer does a lot of empathetic stuff. I think that it's not as much through the gameplay mechanics. That's one of the things I love about Celeste is the gameplay mechanics drive a lot of the feelings you have, and it brings you to the point of frustration and lets you feel relief, and it lets you decide how much you want to challenge yourself. It's quite a nice structure for bringing you through that emotional journey, and it's very well balanced. But it's interesting to me how they're able to pull that off, and I have a lot of questions about how to use gameplay mechanics in terms of emotional journeys, in terms of emotional impact. This game raises so many questions, way more questions than answers on this episode, for sure. So many questions about what is possible in the realm of emotional storytelling through gameplay mechanics, especially, not just through story and through visuals and art and sound design and music, but through the gameplay mechanics themselves. And with that in mind, let's talk about some of those questions that I have and see if we can at least form a few theories. Okay, I have a few really big questions written down. And the first one is, how can we connect gameplay elements to the player's emotions? The obvious one that comes to mind is frustration. I think we've explored that a lot. I don't need to go into too much depth in this podcast. I say we, I mean we as in the game developer community at large, game designers at large. There's a lot of games that make the player feel frustrated, and then they keep making them frustrated and frustrated and frustrated, and then you get relief and a feeling of accomplishment when you complete the task, right? We've got our Dark Souls, Elden Ring, so on and so forth. What about other emotions? And this is where I think the there's the answers that come straight to mind, right? There's engaging with the art, there's the music, there's the sound design, there's all of these elements individually that we can play with to mess with the player's emotions, to guide the player's emotions, let's say, to invite them somewhere. Like, as an example, if you want to make somebody feel horrified, there are so many ways you can do that visually. At some point, I want to do an episode about Splatterhouse 3, but I kind of need to replay it. But that's a great example of like horrifying visuals, just ugh, ugh, and the music in that. I love that game so much. But then let's take an example that's more modern. I think it's Alien Isolation. I can't play it. It's too scary. I got like an hour into it and I was like, "Oh god, I can't do this. I can't play this game, man." It's so intense, and I think like for me, like 80% of the intensity was coming from the sound in that game. It's so creepy. Oh my god, I can't deal with it. It's such a creepy game. Um the visuals are not helping either. So there's stuff like that, right? So we've got horror games. Those are a good example of making you feel certain emotions, or that oh my god, did I forget the name of that amazing demo on the PlayStation that got pulled? Q something? Oh no. I've got to pause. I'll be right back. PT. That's the game I was thinking of. I don't know where I got Q from. PT is that incredible horror demo of the game that never got made that everybody's always very disappointed about. I've watched some gameplay of it. What a cool little journey. That'll make you feel horrified. That'll make you feel kind of revolted and confused and scared and all this stuff. It really engages your emotions. I think what I'm really curious about, though, is how we engage emotions through the mechanics of the game. I think I have a basic understanding of how to engage emotions through like art and music and all this stuff. Not to say that I could execute on it, but I think I have a basic understanding of the way that it is done. The gameplay mechanics are interesting. I don't think that's something that I've engaged with as much throughout my life because it's not really in like film. It's not really in all these different things. I mean, I played a lot of games, but I haven't consciously thought about this enough. Here's the first example I'm going to go through. If you take a platformer and you make the character go to the right, like the whole journey is like Mario, right? You're going from left to right, from one place to another. It feels like you are just moving along a road. It feels like you're going from here to there. You're on a journey, you're trying to get to the end. If you take a platformer like Celeste, you are going up. What does that do to the gameplay? What does that do to the game design? If you take a game and you have the character go down, if it's a game about descending, what does that do to the gameplay? Right? Like, you think about what kind of mechanics am I going to put into a game that's descending? Can I have a super cheerful game where you're diving down into the ground, where you're going downward? Can I have a super cheerful game, super cheerful game where you're like falling through the sky? Not really. I don't know. I feel like you probably could, but maybe it's like a skydiving game, so then it is cheerful. But there's something about the mechanic itself that suggests certain game ideas and suggests certain certain moods, I believe. And I think certain mechanics, more than like left, right, up, down for a platformer, right? That's like getting very nitty gritty. More than I think there's probably specific gameplay mechanics that are very useful for navigating certain emotions. I'm not sure about that, but I think it could be a thing, right? There could be different mechanics that lend you excuse me. There could be certain mechanics that tend to instill a certain feeling in you. Exploration has a tendency to me to lead towards awe and wonder, or grotesque horror, or confusion. I think these are feelings that you can get from exploration. I think typing games have a tendency to lead towards like a stressful. I'm going to cover Cook Serve Delicious 3 in the future, by the way. That's a very much a typing game. I recommend it, but just a little tangent because that's how my brain works. It works in tangents. What was I saying? The idea of a typing game lends itself towards a bit of like a kind of a stressful gameplay in my mind, or towards a fluency even. A game like a war strategy is very like kind of contemplative, but can also be extremely stressful. That's more strategic. So like, what does that even lend itself towards a particular emotion? I think that's stress. Again, I think there's a lot of game mechanics that can lead towards this idea of frustration because we can overwhelm the player. What lends itself towards joy? And these are all, I mean, I'm just spitballing some crazy ideas here. This is like, none of this is ever going to be a hard and fast rule. It's just an interesting thought to me of like, what is the easiest, like if I think of this emotion, what is the mechanic that I think of? So what mechanic do I think of when I think of joy? That's an interesting one to me. I don't know. That's kind of tricky. I wonder what. Okay, so like I can think of stuff for stress. I can think of something for like calm, which would be like a pause, a save point, a moment of rest. I can think of things for horror. I can think of things. I think joy has to be part of a journey, maybe. No? Oh, no. There's a lot of visual stuff, but what about the mechanic itself? I think one of the most joyful games I've played for me was Eastshade, which was about painting. Maybe creative mechanics might be good. That's I'm gonna have to think on that. I'm really not sure, and I'd encourage you to think on that too. I think we're all gonna have our own individual answers for this. I think the mechanic that brings one person to a state of anger will bring somebody else to a state of calm. Sometimes stress can calm you down and soothe you, right? Like there's all these different ways that people function, and it's quite individual. Okay, so that's that covers a lot of what I was thinking about this. Here's a thought experiment. Could you make a game have an emotional story arc purely through the game mechanics and like very bare bone visuals? I think if you give yourself whatever you want visually, then yes, absolutely no problem. But what if you do very, very bare bones on the mechanics? I heard of a game. Was it called like Thomas Was Alone? I'm forgetting the name of this, and I'm not gonna be able to Google this one right off the top of my head, unless that happened to be right. It's a game about like a box, and he's like making friends that are other shapes. Which from my understanding is very much like a simple visuals game with mechanics that had a strong emotional impact on people. So I think if anything, just because of the existence of that game, which I haven't, man, I say this, I need to play these games before I talk about them. Every game I talk about in a full episode, I have played. But every time that I mention one of these random games, it's because I'm curious about it. So I got to play that one at some point too. But let's ignore that because I don't actually know for sure whether or not it has like story and dialogue and text or anything. Like maybe it has dialogue. So what could we do to make a game into an emotional journey while having it be very bare bones visuals and purely gameplay mechanics focused? I think a big thing you could do is transition between different mechanics. So you could have an evolution of mechanics, kind of like what Evoland 2 does, where it kind of brings you through the whole journey of the evolution of games. Interesting game, by the way. Definitely worth looking at. I'm just full of game recommendations today, huh? But I think if you took something and had the game evolve throughout the game, like had the mechanics evolve, had the graphics evolve, all that stuff, that's going to take you on an emotional arc, even though you're not using any particular story. It's an interesting thought experiment because it kind of makes me go, can the game mechanics have an impact? Because that's really the question I'm trying to get at here is like, can the game mechanics themselves on their own have an emotional impact? Because you look at art, you look at visual art, and it can have an emotional impact on its own. Just a giant wall of color can have a huge emotional impact on you. You look at a story, and it can have an impact on its own. Just words, boom, done. Sounds on their own, emotional impact, done. Nails on a chalkboard, yeah, that's got an emotional impact real quick. Or the sound of a lullaby. I mean, they were getting into music, right? But even just like a calming single tone in the right kind of pitch and tone quality and sound quality, it can be soothing. So what about game mechanics? Can a game mechanic be on its own an emotionally impactful thing? You know what? Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Because of the fact that a game mechanic can be frustrating, it can have an emotional impact. Because if it can be frustrating, then it can have smooth flow. And if it can have smooth flow, then it can make you feel something other than frustration, right? And then exploration can give you this sense of awe, wonder, and joy. And even if you if you really whittle it down to its absolute fundamentals, I think you can still do it. I think you can still create that feeling of, oh wow, I'm exploring something, even if you were just a dot on a gigantic white background and you're just like running into things while you explore. That's my answer to it. This is a topic that I'm super, super interested in and invested in. It's one of my favorite weird things in games that like it's hard to put words to and it's hard to explore, but it's well worth it. Having said that, let's wrap up the conversation about Celeste and let's get to this week's sustainability tip. The tip I have this week, and I call it a tip. I always feel weird calling it a tip. It's more of just like an idea, a suggestion, a thought that might be cool, might be helpful, might be not at all. This is something I've done in the past. This week's tip is to try journaling. I personally don't do it anymore, but I used to do it pretty regularly. I found it useful in some ways, and then depending on my mood, it could actually be not as useful. So, what have you. It's for some people it's great, for some people it's not. It depends on how you end up journaling. If you journal and you just wallow and talk about how your life is the worst thing ever and you just don't actually like process that or like work through it or anything, and you just keep repeating the same like negative thing over and over every day, it kind of just like stagnates, right? But the reason I'm mentioning journaling is because Celeste is such a like emotional journey that I think it's valuable to connect that to our own lives and say, how can I be in touch with my own emotions? How can I process my own emotional journey? Are any things in my life blocking me or like emotionally? Are there things that are making things more difficult than they need to be? So journaling or some other form of personal exploration. The best alternative for me, generally speaking, is actually going on hikes, or walks even. I get so much value out of going on a walk, or if I'm really feeling it, a run. I do not do that much these days. But something where you can get in touch with your own mind and give yourself some peace and some space from all the noise, whether that be writing in a book, walking through nature, working out, whatever it is. And journaling is the specific one that I'm throwing out there today because it feels, for some reason, it feels tightly connected to Celeste. And I think it's just because there's so much emotional processing going on in that game. And if you haven't played it, I really do recommend it. It really is a great emotional journey that helps you tap into your own feelings in certain ways, depending on the player, of course. Um, yeah, so that's this week's tip is get in touch with your feelings. These tips are just, they're just ideas. They're not, I say tip, it makes me feel a little weird about like feeling like I'm presenting myself as an expert in something, in creating things. Boy, is that not the case. I want to be very clear about that. Not an expert in creating things. I'm a guy figuring it out, and I throw these tips out there to make myself think about it and to throw suggestions out there in case somebody runs into it and goes, oh, shoot, I've never tried that, but that actually makes a lot of sense. Or, oh, I've done that before and I haven't done it in a while. Maybe I need to do that again. Or like, oh, how is that related to game dev? That's related to game dev? That's wild. Because for me, all this stuff is related to game dev. Taking care of myself is related, and that is not to mean that I take care of myself for the sake of being able to develop games. Not at all. I develop games because it's part of taking care of myself. My life does not revolve around this, but it is a major part of my life that I am trying to develop as like this foundational pillar of creative expression and hopefully career. I'm making some moves, fingers crossed. We might be moving towards a career in the game industry. God, I would love that. That would be a beautiful thing. I'm getting sidetracked. Quick note for the end of the episode. I am going to be out of town soon. I'm going to go on a vacation at the beginning of June. And so my plan is to actually post episodes. I plan to pre-record episodes and post them. There won't be updates about my own game development in those episodes, but they should be posted nonetheless because I won't have anything to talk about because they're all pre-recorded, right? And I do still intend to post a demo on May the 30th. What else? I did not talk about my own development in this episode. I will talk about it in the next episode. That is my bad. I just got too in the weeds and totally forgot. That is everything for today. Thank you all so much for joining me, and I will see you next time. Get out there, have fun with it, make some stuff. See ya.